Moving countries can be one of the most exciting and most challenging things you'll ever do. And we're here to take one big worry off your plate: your taxes. At Expat Taxes, we understand the complexities of Irish tax from your perspective as an expat and tailor our advice to your needs. With decades of expertise, our team at Expat Taxes will help you navigate tax residency, cross-border taxation, reliefs and returns, and will work with your country's tax advisor to make sure your taxes are sorted. Whether you're an individual or a corporation coming from Australia, the United States, the UK, or anywhere in the world, we want to help you. So visit us at expattaxes.ie to book a consultation today, and let's make moving to Ireland easier together.
Welcome to Tax Bites for Expats, the top tax tips you want to know as an expat. The podcast is here to help answer the common queries and concerns expats have when moving to or from Ireland. Complex taxes explained simply. We'll focus on the Irish and international tax issues to be aware of to ensure you save time, money, and stress.
Welcome back to Tax Bites for Expats. This is another two-part episode after my chat with Alan Purcell, a chartered accountant and tax expert with Cloud Accounts. He shared so much with me, so we had to break it into two different episodes. This week is part one, where Alan tells us about PAYE taxation in Ireland, the difference for PAYE between countries, and how to get the most from your tax return. He is adamant about registering with revenue.ie and checking to see if they owe you money, because you never know what the Irish government might give you back. Join us in 2 weeks for part two of this discussion, and enjoy this part of my conversation with Alan Purcell. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Tax Bites for Expats, and today it's a first for us. We are joined by an Irish chartered accountant and chartered tax advisor, Alan Purcell from Cloud Accounts. A little bit about Alan before we introduce him to say hello. Cloud Accounts was founded in 2019, and it was initially founded to bridge the gap between large-scale accountancy firms and small businesses, which, as we often find, are overlooked and lack the support and expertise that they need. It's evolved since into a sphere where Alan also aims now to educate and break down the complexities of tax and accounting into easy-to-understand language. We love that at Expat Taxes. And to give practical advice on how to navigate the Irish tax system. So I think you're all going to really enjoy this episode. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really good to have you on.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me this morning, Steph.
Yeah, it's great. So I gave you a bit of an intro there, but tell us a little bit about your background. What led you to setting up Cloud Accounts? Because it's a niche service. It's brilliant. We love to see niche providers like ourselves.
Thank you. I suppose my background, as you say, chartered accountant, trained in Big Four, emigrated for a couple of years to Australia, came back to Ireland, worked in a couple of PAYE roles, and I suppose just like many people get that bug to work for yourself, because in theory you think you'll work less, then you start going out on your own and you realise you'll never work harder in your life, and maybe you regret the decision to go working for yourself and give up the PAYE. But where this all came from really was my sister worked as a freelancer in the theatre world, and she did that whole Irish family thing of, you're an accountant, you sort out my tax, thanks very much, and just left it at that and got that over the line. And then suddenly her boyfriend was along, and then suddenly it was, can you help out our friends? And it morphed into, I suppose, a small business from there. And then classic Ireland and word of mouth, it just evolved into more and more and more. Hopefully that's a sign of a good service given.
It definitely is.
That the word of mouth just spreads around, and that is where it came from. And then during COVID, I decided to use that lot of spare time that suddenly was on my hands to do the CTAs with the Irish Tax Institute. And off the back of that, I suppose I started just, giving some people a bit of guidance on tax efficiencies, things they could claim, things they can't claim, how the Irish tax system works. And suddenly an Instagram page fell out of that. And yeah, that whole purpose of that page now is really just to try and educate, as you said in the intro, and to try and just give out some, what you and I would think is basic information. But when you realise, a lot of people are intimidated by the tax system and by revenue themselves, these are things that are often overlooked. They're not taught at school, and they're things that people just often don't want to think about or touch. So I'm trying to just explain to people, these things are there. It's not that difficult of a process. I mean, it's not very straightforward, but it's not difficult either. Once people are kind of educated and empowered to go off and claim what they are eligible to claim, hopefully that will put some money back in their pockets, which at the moment is obviously quite relevant and pertinent. So that's kind of the gist of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love it. And I think what you've touched on there is really, really valid and true for a lot of our listeners, which is, it is overwhelming when you maybe return to a tax system that you haven't paid into for years, or you're moving from a new country to Ireland with zero knowledge of what it means. And just before we started to record, we were talking about what people can routinely leave on the table. And the short answer is a lot. A little bit of knowledge can actually be a great thing when it comes to being able to, claim what you're entitled to. So maybe let's, to break it down for people who are listening, let's step through what you would generally say or advise clients who maybe are moving to Ireland and trying to set themselves up in revenue system. Talk us high level through what you would kind of recommend people do in that situation.
Yeah, of course. So first things first, I suppose, is getting access into revenue system. And obviously the key to unlocking that door is being set up with your PPS number, your MyGov ID, and access to Revenue's My Account. Anecdotally speaking, I've seen it myself and been told by other people that Revenue's system seems to be better than maybe other countries that people have arrived to Ireland from. And again, nobody wants to compliment or talk positively about Revenue, but the My Account system is excellent. It's user friendly. It's visually quite attractive, almost as attractive as a tax system could possibly be. But it's it's easy on the eye, and it's just easy to navigate around. And I've seen, between claiming, or filing tax returns, claiming my own taxes back in the past, or advising other people who aren't that familiar with the system, that often a few clicks of a button can actually lead to money being deposited back into a bank account. So it's just about not having the fear, being able to get logged into that Revenue My Account, and also realizing you can't, let's say, break it. And it does take a few clicks of a mouse to file a tax return. So it's not like you're going to click on something and instantly make a mountain out of a molehill for yourself with Revenue. So, not to be shy, to get on there, to use resources that are available. Revenue do have their own educational videos, or else my Instagram page, go on there, and we're firing out information at the moment with video content, and me kind of overlaying voice over it to say, this is what you need to do, this is where you need to click, and this is what you have to do to claim this particular tax credit. And it is step by step and straightforward. But obviously I appreciate that many people will hear the word tax and revenue and just say, oh God, no, I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah, totally. I think as well, when you kind of tip that on its head and think about the fact that for most people, for a family, let's say, where there's two incomes and they're earning over 80k a year, Ireland's tax rate then for everything they earn over that 80,000 is one of the highest in Europe. We have a very high tax rate once you go above a certain level. So I suppose for a little bit of pain, and I would say you're spot on, sit down and do it. Realistically, with a couple of clicks of the button, from start to end, probably isn't going to take you more than 15, 20 minutes. Would you agree with that? If you have the documents to hand, you could really be entering your bank account details in your My Account and see how long are revenue processing refunds within now. A week, 2 weeks for simple My Account?
Oh, within a week, yeah. I've seen them rock back into bank accounts in a couple of days. It's I know, like, they're trying to automate it, obviously, and advance technologically themselves. So I'm sure maybe there's possibly a threshold there, or something built into the system, that if you're only claiming whatever of medical expenses, a couple of £100, maybe that refund comes back quite quickly without having to have as much human oversight on Revenue's end. Obviously, that's not a permission or a free-for-all now for people to go and stick in bogey claims, but just always claim what you're eligible to claim. Always have your backup and your documentation in case it gets probed or queried, which it can do. There's not, like, as you know, Steph, any sort of threshold that if you're under it, you're in the clear, and they're not going to ask questions. People can be picked at random for all sorts of reasons. So be able to stand over what you're putting into that system. But no, it's very quick. And one example would be the work from home kind of tax relief, for tax relief on your broadband, your light and heat expenses. I see so many people on social media platforms and online, giving out saying this isn't worth the effort. It is worth the effort, because even if the amount that comes back to you is small, it's better than absolutely zero. And like, all you're being asked to do in that case is pull out your utility bills, add them up, put the numbers into the system. And in PAYE tax returns, revenue do all the calculations for you. So they just want the gross numbers, the high level numbers. You pop them in, send off the tax return digitally, and more often than not, something will rock back into your bank account, which is fantastic. I know that a few people who may not previously have done tax returns off the back of COVID and the pandemic unemployment payment and the wage subsidy schemes may have found themselves in the reverse position where they're actually owing tax on the PAYE system, which was very, very unusual.
Yeah.
It's probably a once in a lifetime event. We shouldn't be seeing that again. The majority of time that I open up a Form 12 PAYE tax return for somebody, it's either balanced, which means neither revenue or the client owes money before claiming anything that they might be eligible for, or else there's an overpayment already there, and there's a variety of reasons as to why that can happen. But it's very rare that you see an underpayment now, because revenue have modernized the PAYE system and it's always done in real time. So what that means for anyone listening is every time you get paid, your taxes are basically calculated live based on what you've paid during the year, and it shouldn't lead to any surprises at the end of the year in the majority of cases. We're talking 99% of cases, I would say.
Yeah. And actually, do you know what? Just when you're talking there, when we talk about like pay as you earn or my account, a natural question is going to come, oh, okay, what are we like actually talking about here? So maybe just high level explain the delineation in Ireland between, having to file a tax return, Form 11, as we call it, when we kind of talk about a long form tax return, or Form 12. That's kind of the old name for the paper form, which doesn't really exist anymore, which has now been replaced essentially by the My Account. Let's maybe frame that so people listening who would often be coming from jurisdictions where everybody has to file a tax return, maybe let's frame that so people kind of get that distinction.
Yeah, like years ago, I emigrated to Australia, and over there, as a PAYE or PAYG, as they call it in Australia, you had to file your tax return. Even if you had nothing to claim, you just had to click the button and say, yep, that's confirming my income for the year. So I still call the PAYE return the Form 12. I don't know if that name has disappeared at all, but anyway, let's call it a Form 12. And what it is...
I know I do too.
We're showing our age. Where you're a PAYE or a pay-as-you-earn employee, your employer is responsible for calculating your employment taxes and withholding them from your net pay into your bank account and remitting it over to revenue. So, as I say, 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100 at the end of the year, that will all have been done absolutely correctly to the cent. And revenue will say, we don't owe you, you don't owe us. What we do have in Ireland is things called tax credits, which I think is a pretty bad description. Other countries call it a tax-free allowance. And I would much rather see in Ireland that instead of saying, oh, you get 2 tax credits as basic each year for, let's say, a pay-as-you-earn employee and a personal tax credit, and they're worth, what are they now? They're 1,875 each. So it's about 3,000. What is that? Get on my calculator here. This year, they're worth 3,750. I'd rather see revenue turn around and say what that actually means is that you don't have to pay any income tax on the first €18,750 of your income.
Yeah.
I think it's a much clearer way of explaining it than saying, oh, you don't have to pay the first 3,750 of tax that you owe, because that leads to confusion. People are wondering, well, when do I pay it? Those tax credits usually will get divided over your 12 months or your 26 fortnights or your 52 weeks, depending on how frequently you're paid. But anyone who's listening and is wondering about what you mentioned earlier, Steph, the really kind of early entry point that we have in Ireland to the higher rate of tax, people should also be aware that we have a threshold in this country of €18,750 in 2024 where you don't pay 1 cent of income tax. And that's quite generous compared with other countries around Europe. So it's a little bit of swings and roundabouts. However, we do have quite a penal higher tax entry point, unfortunately, at €42,000 in 2024 in Ireland. But I suppose to your question on the Form 12, what does it mean? You're not obligated to file this by revenue. But why you might want to file it is if you want to claim tax credits and tax reliefs that revenue aren't aware of that you might be eligible to claim. So they can be things like tax relief on some medical expenses, tax relief on work from home expenses, like I mentioned a few moments ago. A common one that gets overlooked a lot is claiming a tax credit on medical insurance where your employer pays that on your behalf as a benefit in kind.
Yeah.
That can be worth up to €200 per adult or €100 per child. So that's usually a good one. The rent tax credit was newly introduced in 2022. It was worth €500 in 2022 and 2023. It's now worth €750 in 2024. It's a bit of a drop in the ocean compared to what people are paying on rent. I've claimed that for some people, got them back their €500, and I've nearly had a tear in my eye looking at the 20 plus grand that they've spent on rent to get back this 500. But yeah,
I know. It's a drop in the ocean, isn't it?
a drop in the ocean at a different day's conversation. But it's better than nothing. Although that one, it is a bit of a slap in the face, being honest. I know there has been talk about getting a month's rent back. Maybe it's a positive sign that already that rent tax credit has gone from 500 to 750. Maybe it will continue to increase in the coming years. In 2023, we have a new mortgage interest tax relief for some people who might have seen their mortgage interest repayments increase in 2023. Another one that often gets overlooked and brings a big smile to my face when I can claim it for my clients is the home carer tax credit, because I often find many people think that home carer might mean they're looking after somebody who's infirmed or disabled or elderly, but it actually also relates to if you are a stay-at-home parent and looking after your children. And that is quite a valuable one. I think it's €1,800 this year, and that's cold hard cash of a tax credit. So like in our intro before we came on, I was explaining to you, Steph, that I had a client last year whose tax bill was £5,000 plus higher than it should have been if he was under the joint assessment system. But he wasn't eligible to claim this home carer credit because he isn't jointly assessed with his partner. Again, possibly another day's conversation, but anyone who's coming to Ireland who is married or in a civil partnership should understand that if they are jointly assessed, and that means combined as two individuals into one taxpayer unit, as Revenue call them, they could potentially pay less tax, depending on their incomes and different circumstances. But that only applies to married couples or couples in civil partnerships for the time being. And basically, there's a whole other range and host of tax credits that exist. Some of them aren't nice to talk about because they're like, single parent or widowed parent or blind person credits. And, sometimes as tax advisors, you might have this, you're asking fairly personal and awkward questions that Irish people often don't like to talk about. But again, I would say to anyone listening, just Google revenue tax credits and see the list of them. There are so many. And every year, at the start of the year and at the end of the year, you hear Revenue and loads of other agencies all across the radio talking about the hundreds of millions of taxes that are overpaid by PAYE, pay-as-you-earn taxpayers every single year. And it is hundreds and hundreds of millions that could possibly be reclaimed by sitting down for 30 minutes, maybe an hour. It shouldn't take you more than an hour. And just clicking the buttons, putting in those figures. And if it's in January or February you do it, it's possibly a nice lump sum to arrive into your bank account just after the Christmas period. Or if you do it towards the end of the year, it's a nice little bonus coming into Christmas. And what I'd also say to people is Revenue are probably generous, nearly in a way, to allow you to claim and file tax returns for the previous 4 years. So anyone who thinks, I haven't claimed X, Y, or Z ever, you might have a very nice surprise if you log in, file 4 years worth of tax returns. That might take you an hour and a half all in, but it could be financially well worth it at the end of that time.
You're spot on. And there's nothing nicer than doing a tax return for a client who, is going to get a little refund.
Thanks for listening to Tax Bites for Expats. Please do leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, remember to take professional tax advice specific to your personal circumstances before acting or refraining from action in connection with the matters dealt with in this series. The material in this podcast is intended to give general guidance only.